So far, we have been assuming that the robots were after the engine, because that is what Maureen Robinson assumed and stated. However, Maureen is shown to be wrong about everything except her job, and especially wrong about motivations. Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today we are taking a look at one of the central questions of the 2018 series Lost in Space. What is the motivation of the alien species in this science fiction series? What are they after? The assumption that most of the fandom has been making is that the robots are on a justified rescue mission to save Scarecrow from the vicious aliens who tortured him and used his engine. But 2 months ago, I made this video, there it is up in the corner, go click it, asking if the robots were after John instead of Scarecrow's engine. But that theory had a few gaping holes in it. Namely, one, Sar, the second alien robot, had an excellent chance to snatch John at the end of Season 1, but passed right over the Elder Robinson when he was trapped in the Jupiter fragment at the end of Season 1. Sar then breached and boarded the J2 where the engine was. 2, Mohawk and the other silver robots who rose from the regenerative ring on the Amber Planet went after the children on the T8 instead of following John onto the J2 at the end of Season 2. This really contradicted the idea that the robots have some reason to get John Robinson. However, the concept that they weren't strictly after Scarecrow's engine still seemed solid, partly due to this little scene where the fake Dr. Smith escapes the interrogation room and overhears the two crew outside of Scarecrow's engine. They say, there was always the risk that they would come back for it. They, a plural, would come back. They, plural, have been there before. There being the Resolute, they being more than just one robot. This heavily implies that the robots had been there before. They knew where Scarecrow and his engine was the entire time. So why attack when they did? Why didn't they send more robots? Why didn't they pull their tortured comrade out of there long before? Granted, that is a whole lot to hang on one word. But then I was rewatching the Season 1 to get some good reference shots of Sar for an art project I'd commissioned, and I froze the frame on this image on the screen, the one you can see up above. It provides an excellent size, mass, and color comparison for Sar and Robot, which is why I took the shot. It can be found near the end of the 10th episode of Season 1. Now this is a very interesting scene. Maureen had just knocked Robot Robinson out the airlock with the hydraulic arm, thinking that Robot was a threat. The airlock closes behind Robot, and the Robinsons think they're safe. Will is tied to the wall, and Penny and Judy are locked in the chariot, when the airlock cranks open again, and Robot forces the Jupiter's bay's door open from the outside. Interestingly, this is the first and only time that a robot opens the door to a spaceship instead of blasting through the wall. Sar then boards Jupiter. Robot's face is still blue and non-threatening up to this point, the same way it was the entire time Maureen was knocking him around. If he was actually fighting her with hostile intentions, his face should have been red, according to everything we've seen. But it wasn't. Then, Sar turns towards Robot, and Sar's face alters to the red ellipse shape. Robot's face immediately alters to match it. Then Robot points, and Robot and Sar both turn to look at what Robot is pointing. At the time, I thought Sar was asking where the engine was, and Robot was telling him. Pointing is a very specific answer to a very specific question. Where is X? The ellipse seemed a direct reference to the elliptical engine, but even before Season 2, this seemed a bit odd to me. It was pretty clear that the robots could sense each other to some degree. Robot's legs found his body after all, and then in Season 2 it was confirmed that not only could Sar sense the engine, even his detached arm could locate and seek out the engine. So there was literally no reason for Sar to ask Robot where the engine was. But looking at this image, it suddenly occurred to me that Robot wasn't pointing at the engine. The engine was under the chariot, almost on the floor. His arm and finger are pointing straight out from his shoulder, a good 6 feet off the ground. To be pointing at the engine, Robot's entire arm would have to be angled over 45 degrees lower than it is in this image. And it isn't just his arm. Both Robot's face and Sar's face turn to look at the same point. This gives us a triangulation. A triangulation is 3 vectors from 3 different origin points pointing at the same point in space. This is a very important concept for science fiction, and there's no way it is coincidental, especially because triangulation is a critical concept to ancient sailing, which will be very relevant in Season 2. The creators want us to know exactly what the 2 alien robots are looking at, what they are pointing at, and what they are thinking about. And they are pointing directly at Judy Robinson. This heavily implies that the question Sar asked was in fact, where is Judy Robinson? However, as she was literally right there in plain sight, her face was looking right at SAR, her name was on her chest plate facing SAR. This means that SAR had no actual data on her. He didn't know her face or her name. And we know that the robots have no trouble identifying and differentiating humans from one another, as shown by the silver robots that arose on the Amber planet, stopping to look at Will Robinson, identifying him, and then deciding to crisp him. So SAR must have been looking for a concept without details, a concept whose literal physical practical definition was Judy Robinson, but who he only had data for in the abstract. The only clues we have are what prior knowledge SAR could have had, and the image he used to ask the question. The only human interaction that the robots could have had before their interaction with the Resolute was with the Fortuna and Grant Kelly, who was the only named member of the expedition, therefore the only relevant one for storytelling purposes. Judy Robinson's biological father. Judy Robinson is Grant Kelly's daughter. As I said, at the end of Season 1, ignorant of Grant Kelly's location within 20 light years of the robot's home system, I assumed that the ellipse referred to the engine. But Robot didn't answer the question with the location of the engine, but with the location of Grant Kelly's daughter. When I looked at the ellipse again, I noticed something odd. Both the image on SAR's and Robot's display had a secondary pair of ellipses at each end of the larger ellipse. The engine does not have any such markings or structural form. The markings on the sides of the ellipse are almost exactly opposite of the main image on the robot's faces, in fact. Now, this could have been just a hieroglyphical stylization of the word in the robot's language, but, do you know what does have that littler ellipses at the end of a larger ellipse? Look, the daughter cells of the process of biological reproduction. Daughter cells, and the only two clues we have to answer the question of why SAR would ask a question that Robot answered by pointing at Judy Robinson was that this was that shape and the fact that she was the biological daughter of Grant Kelly. So, what if the question SAR asked was, where is the biological daughter of Grant Kelly? The faces of the robots are deeply complex light shows. It is entirely possible that SAR was showing Robot Robinson an entire genetic code spread out between the anaphase and telophase stages of cellular reproduction. It is equally possible that Robot Robinson replied not with Grant Kelly's genetic code, but with Judy Robinson's. Or, as might have been the case, it is frequent for sailors to take locks of their loved ones' hairs with them into space. Grant Kelly might have had on his person, when he interacted with the robots, some of Maureen's genetic code. Therefore, the robots might have been able to determine that the person they were looking for would be a mixture of Grant Kelly's and Maureen's genetic code, which might explain why they were discussing the anaphase-telophase separation of the mixture of these two genetic codes. A daughter. And the fact that Grant Kelly had a daughter is something the robots could have known because Maureen had to have been pregnant before Grant left on his ill-fated mission. So it is possible that the robots were looking for genetic codes that matched his, or that matched a combination of his and Maureen's. Now, what about other foreshadowing hints from the show? Is there anything artistically that could point us in this direction? Oh, I'm so glad you asked, my dear viewers. Judy's first line in the series is to ask why the Resolute suddenly malfunctioned after 23 ships. If she was the reason, that was a deeply ironic question. My apologies if I'm using ironic wrong. Coincidental, perhaps. Of course, John Robinson doesn't believe in irony, which is a very, very strange thing for a soldier to say. What highly intelligent soldiers often say is, I don't believe in coincidences. And Don West points out that this itself is ironic. And it might indeed be ironic if the highly intelligent John Robinson uses the word irony instead of coincidences. But, however, that's a side point. The first named victim of the robot attack we interact with is the real Dr. Smith, who we find out in Season 2 is a pediatrician. Now, a pediatrician is a doctor for children. Now, this is very interesting because the only doctors that we know were actively working in the medical bay of the Resolute on that trip were the pediatricians like Dr. Smith. We know this from the scene where Penny and Will are playing with the electrostatic fields around Scarecrow's engine room, making their hair dance on end, and Maureen chases them away to go get their immune boosting shots before she stops and plays with the electromagnetic field, making her hair stand on end. So it is reasonable to assume that Dr. Smith was at work inoculating the kids when the robots attacked, which means the robots attacked at very near or at the medical bay, if not within the medical bay itself, which was where you might expect to find a doctor like Judy Robinson, which may or may not be relevant. They might have had no way to know that she would be a doctor, but at the very least, the medical bay would have been where the records of genetic codes were stored, and it has been shown that the robots are perfectly capable of hacking the Resolute systems near instantly. If the robots were looking for one genetic code among many, it makes sense that they would start there. The only other of Judy's relatives we hear mentioned in the show is the grandma of the cookies from the Christmas Star episode. Now, we don't know if this is the same grandma as Maureen's mother, the one with the farm and the horses where Maureen and Penny spent their time, but the fact that Maureen doesn't know the recipe for the cookies suggests probably not. That leaves two other options. This grandmother might have been Grandma Robinson, John's mother, or Grandma Kelly. But it is interesting that she gave the recipes, the code for these cookies, to Judy and no one else. Because if this grandmother was Grandma Kelly, there was another code that she gave to Judy and no one else, almost directly, with no alterations, her X chromosome, which would have been passed on from Grant Kelly to Judy. This perspective also makes Robot Robinson's behavior on the nameless planet seem less innocent and more deliberate, more like the calculated actions of a fully aware warrior in hostile territory actively pursuing his mission, and far less like an innocent, childlike amnesiac. If Robot Robinson's goal was to keep Judy Robinson contained, alive, but stuck on the planet until she could be retrieved, his actions still make perfect sense. Robot rescues Judy from the ice, a fairly selfless act for an amnesiac with no motivation, but a very calculated move for a targeted mission to keep his mark alive and integrate himself with her family. He locks Will in the storage bay, seeming to be overcome by Will's emotions, which handily allows the eels to eat the fuel keeping her trapped on the nameless planet. Robot then lets Will out only after the eels have eaten enough fuel to strand the Robinson. If Robot hadn't locked Will in the closet, the Robinsons could have flown up and got help from the Resolute immediately, rescuing all the colonists. The humans would have been gone long before SAR arrived in the system. After Robot defeats the Moth Chomper, he very interestingly turns his attention to where John, Penny, and Judy were hiding, ignoring Will and the rest of the colonists in favor of focusing on his mark, Judy. Another interesting thing is the timing of Robot walking off that cliff. Now, Will didn't know, but Robot did, that dismemberment and the loss of his life wasn't death. It wasn't a death sentence. It was an inconvenience at worst. It simply eliminated Robot Robinson from the equation until he was reassembled. And looking at it from this perspective means that Robot wasn't being controlled by Will, but chose to walk off that cliff. From the perspective of the soldier whose mission was to keep his mark on planet, but was having second thoughts about the morality of his orders, it makes perfect sense. Robot didn't want to hurt Will. He had already hurt Will terribly when he had injured John Robinson. Robot knew that Will and Judy were close. Judy was essentially a second mother to Will, and handing Judy over to SAR for whatever reason would hurt Will badly, both the betrayal and the loss of Judy. When Robot decided to walk off that cliff, remember, Judy had just found the fuel they needed to get to the Resolute and was headed back to camp. If the tanker hadn't overturned, the humans would have been able to get off planet and out of the system long before SAR reached the nameless planet. However, Robot would have been obligated as an officer and a soldier to prevent Judy from leaving if he was able to when she got back to camp. As far as Robot knew when he walked off that cliff, he would wake up a few days later when SAR arrived. SAR would demand to know where the humans had gone, and Robot would honestly answer that he didn't know he had been incapacitated. By walking off of that cliff, Robot was removing the threat he posed to the colony. It seems from the way he reacted to the Moth Chomper and getting attacked by Angela that Robot has programs or standing orders that can at least partially override his own will under circumstances, and he didn't want to hurt Judy or Will. But then, the tanker does turn over and the fuel gets lost. Time passes, and by the time Robot does wake up, thanks to Dr. Smith's meddling, SAR is already in the system and zeroing in on Robot, his engine, and Judy. And when Robot grabs the chariot, he is stopping Judy from leaving, as much as he is following Dr. Smith's orders, if he was following Dr. Smith's orders at all. And he just stands there looking at Judy. He has to do something he really doesn't want to. He gets his engine and puts it under the chariot and gets Judy into space to meet SAR. He leads SAR onto the Jupiter too. He follows his orders. He shows SAR where Judy is. On a side note, this also might explain why SAR tried to kill Will, but not any of the others in the bay. If he knew that he was looking for a female human and could tell the difference between human males and females, and if he needed her alive, but didn't want to leave any witnesses, Will would have been the only human who was obviously not Judy, being male, and therefore expendable by the process of elimination. And interestingly enough, SAR seemed surprised, just a little bit surprised to see the engine when he blasted the side of the chariot. Now, why he blasted the side of the chariot is another question. Perhaps he was trying to crack the chariot open like a nut, which would have killed Judy, or he was attempting to seal the chariot shut so Judy couldn't escape. Either way, the engine rolls out, and he bends over to pick up the engine, seems to be distracted by Will, and raises his hand as if he's going to commit violence against Will, which was apparently what Robot assumed he was going to do too. And that is when Robot fully turns on SAR and fights him off of the Jupiter 2, leaving Robot's engine with Judy on the Jupiter. The engine then jumps the Jupiter 2 to the safest place Robot Robinson knows, his own homeworld, a place with everything the Robinsons need to survive and plentiful methane. The one thing that they have been grousing about and claiming to need as the most important thing this entire time on the nameless planet. Once the Robinsons are gone and the Resolute follows them to the danger system, SAR leaves the Resolute crippled in orbit, incidentally leaving the Scarecrow to die. This effectively strands the Resolute, creating a lure for the Robinsons, a known location that they would have to come back to. On another note, we don't know that SAR ever retrieved Scarecrow's engines because something maintained constant gravity on the Resolute while it was abandoned for 7 months, according to the Healthy Horse theory. I go into this further in this video about where SAR's engines was, or rather where it wasn't. But the main bit of foreshadowing happens in the scene where Judy and John Robinson are waiting for the Silver Robots in front of Grant Kelly's memorial. In that scene, the Silver Robots from the Amber Planet, we think they are chasing the engine, but in actuality they're chasing Judy and the engine. And once they get free, they again head for both the engine and Judy on the TH. While they are supposed to be singularly focused on the engine, they do stop to consider Will Robinson, and just like SAR, when they identify him, they decide to crisp him like a pig on a poke, all as if they were checking to make sure that wasn't Judy Robinson, and once they were sure he wasn't, Will was of no importance. And then, rather than let the T-8 escape, Mohawk, the leader of the Silver Robots, named for those fantastic spines on his back, tried to destroy the T-8, only being stopped by Scarecrow's timely intervention. This move on Mohawk's part doesn't really make sense if he was sent to rescue the engine. However, if he was sent to capture or kill an enemy target, it makes perfect sense. Now, the why is more vague, but the clues provided do offer some interesting possibilities. The alien tech can be used by humans even without much meddling. Maureen and fake Dr. Smith were able to open the engine compartment on Robot's ship even when he wasn't touching it. So it makes sense that Grant Kelly, the astronaut who was smart enough to earn Maureen's respect enough to get her to say yes to him, might have been able to use the alien tech. He might have been able to do something, lock some door, encrypt some important bit of information. He might have coded it to his genetics. And now these robots need that code to unlock the door, to access the data, to get something. And it looks like they all have different motivations. Every action SAR takes seems to be every action Scarecrow takes seems to be trying to preserve the lives of the humans on the Resolute and protect Judy Robinson. So I think that Scarecrow would have been sent to Earth to contact her, to get her. Scarecrow needs her alive. The blue robots, represented by Robot Robinson and SAR, would prefer her alive, but would be disappointed if she wasn't alive, but seemed to not be too particular about it. Meanwhile, Mohawk and the Silvers have a very much dead or alive mentality, it doesn't matter. So, this heavily implies that all of these robots have different motivations, right down to the individual level. And that they're trying to get her or her genetics, and that ellipse that SAR asked Robot about might have been asking about the genetic daughter of Grant Kelly. So, what if, from the robot's perspective, Judy Robinson is the MacGuffin that is driving the series? What if they are after a key that will open some door for them? What do you think, my wonderful viewers? Leave a like below if you agree, and leave a comment atomizing my theory like the Resolute if you disagree. Hit that subscribe button and share the video. Peace out, my wonderful viewers. Have a great day.